All right. Well, this is from the 9/11 Commission, and it's panelist Bob Kerrey interviewing Gerard Arpey, CEO of United Airlines, and Edmond Soliday, the Vice President of United Airlines for Safety and Security. And it was dated, as you can see, January 27, 2004. Let's see what they have to say.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Apologize in the interest of time. We started late, and there's a very important, as you alluded to, moment that this commission will have an opportunity to participate in at 3:30. So I will try to go as quickly as I can, and I'll have some additional questions, if you don't mind, that you could perhaps answer in writing. First of all, I want to thank you for coming. You didn't have to, and I suspect, especially in your case, Mr. Arpey, that your lawyers may have advised you not to. So I appreciate very much your coming here and trying to help us get the full and complete accounting that we are tasked as a consequence of the legislation that created this commission. It's also important to say that you weren't just selected by us because you can help us from the standpoint of American United. As a company, you suffered in a personal way, but you also suffered in an economic way, and you can help us because you, perhaps in America, no two companies have a greater sense of urgency to understand both what happened and what do we do today to make sure it doesn't happen again. But you were selected by the conspirators, and one of the things I'm going to try to make this point slightly different than I've made before. The people who perpetrated these acts on the 11th September, they don't feel remorse. They don't feel shame. They didn't target the pilot. They weren't going after somebody and then accidentally kill some additional people as a consequence. They were trying to kill as many as possible. It's a religious beginning. I don't believe all Muslims by any extent believe this. I don't see all Muslims this way at all. This is an extreme form of Islam, but it is a religious belief, and it's not new. It didn't just spring on us in 2001. All the risk grew considerably in 2001. Osama bin Laden began with a relationship actually with us in Afghanistan, but he declared in 1998 a fatwa, and my guess is 19 participants responded to that fatwa and participated.
Actually, there were two fatwas, one in 96, which was directed only at U.S. military in Mecca and Medina, which was one of the many directives that bin Laden had against the United States. The others were the Gulf War and the sanctions that killed 500,000 men, women, and children, mostly sickly and poor, in the oil for food program, and also with the relationship with Israel, which has led to a number of conflicts in the Middle East, which was the Palestinian problem. 1998 was the expansion of the fatwa. Not only was it for the military, but for Americans wherever you find them.
As a consequence, and I think
when I pause the video, there'll be like a 5-second.
It's very important to understand that because we continue to put this word terrorism over the top of this for some reason that's beyond my reach, and I think it makes it difficult for us both to understand the why and more importantly the what do we need to do. And I would like to begin by asking you. Perhaps it's you, Mr. Arpey, first, or you, Mr. Ahern, because you had some significant response in this area. What's your understanding of the law, the 44902 section of U.S. Code Title 49? Seems to be very specific that you have the responsibility, as well as the authority, to refuse to transport people that you consider to be at risk to the passengers on the airline. I mean, do you believe you have, under that law, a responsibility to prevent, or do you believe your responsibility is merely to deter?
Well, maybe I could start and Tim could jump in. I think, Senator, the important thing to remember in both a pre-9/11 and even in a post-9/11 world is that the airlines are responsible for implementing the security procedures that are given to us by the federal government, who have the ability to make the threat assessments, take all of this intelligence data, take that information, put it through whatever intelligence sources are necessary, and turn it into a security paradigm on which we can implement. And in the pre-9/11 environment, that's what we had done, and I think we were good stewards in the pre-9/11 environment in terms of doing what we were asked to do. But as I said in my in my introductory remarks, nobody anticipated the type of threat that we encountered on the morning of September 11th.
Let me press.
Not necessarily true, because you've had warnings that go back to at least 1996 about terrorists wanting to hijack planes and using them to crash into U.S. targets. And that comes from the Bajinka plot. And I've repeatedly stated this, that the information that was gathered, the interrogation of one of the Bajinka plotters, Abdul Hakim Arad, who was interrogated by Philippine police led by Rodolfo Mendoza. According to Mendoza, that report and profile and all the contents within it, which were a number of, it's almost a month's worth, was given to the FBI. And according to Director Lewis Free, they were talking about the notion of the dangers of the airline industry, and that there were terrorist cells operating inside the United States in secret. Marad had stated to his interrogators in the Philippines that there were sleeper cells inside the United States, that they were there for a couple of years, that were training at flight schools. Now, this is also reciprocated by a Phoenix agent by the name of Ken Williams, who wrote a Phoenix memo detailing from an informant of his that there were a number of foreign Arabs training at flight schools in Scottsdale and Phoenix. Arizona is considered the primary state regarding the best flight schools in the country. There's also more flight schools there than any other state. And plus, it's a hot climate, so Arabs are more accustomed to live in that type of environment. So there's a bonus there. So as you could see, that there were warnings that predate 9/11 regarding flights, airliners that were in danger of being hijacked by Arab fundamentalists. But here's the problem. Was there any security modifications, stricter security measures regarding the airline industry? And no, of course not. So when you had people like Mohammed Atta and Marwan al-Shehi in the year prior to 9/11, when they were seen by airline employees and even an actor, James Woods, at airlines scouting the security of these of American Airlines.
That a bit, because I'm
Not the company, but the security apparatus. of the
National Security
Airlines of
Advisor
America.
Rice made a very famous statement in which he said nobody could have predicted this. I disagree with that. I mean, I absolutely disagree with it. I mean, you're talking, I presume that you've got safety precautions dealing with a plane that's fully loaded with 70,000 pounds of jet fuel that you consider to be dangerous all by itself as a consequence of having the flammable material on it. I presume that you've got procedures to deal with a pilot or two pilots that might wig out, and I presume that you've got procedures to screen your own pilots to make certain that something terrible doesn't happen. And you may not have been able to say, oh my God, maybe suicide is going to be a part of this thing, but even there, I must say, given what was going on again in the Islamic extremist groups, they were using suicide technology. I mean, if they were using the technology of suicide to accomplish their objectives increasingly. So, I mean, even there, I must say, I have a difficult time with an argument, gee, nobody could have predicted this, because I think if you're thinking about, you know, trying to prevent all instances like this, it seems to me that that would have been on the list.
Well, again, Senator, I'll just be candid with you. If you go back to the morning of 9/11, the entire security paradigm that was in place, given to us by the FAA, did not anticipate this type of threat.
But you keep saying that it's
Let me stop you there because I want to bring up something that I've been posting. So this is the Civil Aviation Security Reference Handbook dated May 9, 1999, where I'm going to bring up page 2, okay? The threat to civil aviation and global security, where they do talk about terrorism activities being a threat, or terrorism being a threat to the American airline industry. And as you could see here, let me scroll down a little bit. Chapter 1, the threat to civil aviation, a global challenge, where it says civil aviation at risk. And one of the things they talk about is Pan Am Flight 103, which killed all 259 passengers and 11 residents in Lockerbie, Scotland, where there was a bomb placed on the airline and it blew up over the air. The criminal threat to U.S. civil aviation. The terrorist threat to U.S. civil aviation. You talk about radical Palestinian groups like the Abu Nidal Organization and the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine General Command. And why terrorism is a greater threat. So obviously, whether Gerard Arpey is aware of this document, which I'm sure he is, as you could see, and I'll blow this up. For example, while a criminal extortionist or murderer may target a single flight, convicted terrorist Ramzi Youssef was willing to consider placing explosive devices aboard multiple U.S. air carrier flights departing Asia in early 1995. Likewise, the radical Islamist hijackers of Air France Flight 8969 in December of 94, reportedly planning to crash the hijacked plane into Paris. In fact, the Eiffel Tower was the target. So, and this, like I wanted to bring this up because the date of this report is important. This is May 1999. They were talking about the Pachinko plot, as I mentioned previously, and they were talking about the terrorist hijacking of Air France 8969. And that's 1994. That predates Pachinko. Why wasn't there stricter security measures? Well, according to Arpey here, they were implemented. You know, a lot of these hijackers went through the CAP screening, where it's additional security screening, where they check your luggage. They only do this if you have a profile that is suspect, whether you travel to a country like Pakistan, Afghanistan, but these guys were from Saudi Arabia, majority of them. So, and because the United States had a very sensitive relationship with them, they didn't want to basically cause any problems. So a lot of these people that were from Saudi Arabia or the Gulf, like United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, they were given carte blanche regarding travel, and they weren't given any strict security measures. You wonder why a lot of these muscle hijackers were from Saudi Arabia, and the only hijacker pilot that was from Saudi Arabia was Hani Hanjour. Mohammed Atta was from Egypt, Ziad Jarrah was from Lebanon. Marwan al-Shehi was from where was he from? Not too sure. I forgot. So there you have it. I mean, these are the guys that are coming in with weapons. The pilots are not. So when they brought in their box cutters, which was allowed, and that's from the report as well, box cutters are allowed, but it's up to discretion of the security app conducting the screening. That's been modified since after 9/11, but you understand what I'm saying is that a lot of these missile hijackers are coming from a country we already have a tentative relationship with, and we didn't want to offend anyone. So a lot of these guys, even though some of them were given a second screening through CAPS program, that wasn't the case for most of them. So their luggage wasn't checked. And also, this is not bringing up the fact, I'm not forgetting the fact that there were definitely weapons planted on these planes. And I talked about the issue with the five Arab men that tried to enter the Dulles Airport tarmac, and security guard Eric Gill from Argenbright basically stopped them. But when he left his post, there wasn't a relief guard. So when he left his post, anybody could have went through that door. Now, whether they saw him leave or not is unknowable as of now. But what do you think they were trying to do? I mean, even in the days after 9/11, CNN reported that on the day of 9/11, they were finding weapons hidden on the planes. And there were additional hijackings that were stopped. I talk about United Airlines Flight 23, which was a potential hijack. They found the luggage belonging to three guys that had an Al-Qaeda manual, Florida flight training license. So yeah.
It's the FAA that's telling you to.
They can't feign ignorance regarding
But
United
I
Airlines.
must tell you that the
Your
law
opinion.
doesn't mention the FAA. The law
Excuse me.
says an air carrier, quote, an air carrier may refuse to transport a passenger property the carrier decides is or might be inimical to safety, end of quote. Doesn't mention the FAA at all. And it, I presume that you're familiar with the list of prohibited passengers,
Yes, sir.
that you have to implement that?
Yes.
And do you participate in that? Do you say, gee, the list is too small, the list is too big? I mean, I'm talking about pre-9/11. There were, we've been given the list of 15 people, at least at least on the surface, it looks like 13 of them were in some way connected to Islamic extremism.
Well, I think, and Tim, jump in here, but that list, I think, came out of the FAA's own threat assessment of what the industry should be trying to protect itself against. And they came up with that list, and on the basis of that list, we put in procedures to screen.
That list is also outdated. I didn't mean to, but I had to bring this up. That's an old list regarding a lot of old names that should have been on there anyway. I think that list was outdated by at least 10 years or something like that, if it's the list I'm thinking about. There's also a tip-off database where it's an international database regarding people who are considered threats to the country. Now, whether United Airlines or the FAA has access to the tip-off base, I'm assuming FAA does. I don't think United Airlines does specifically. So that, and all these walls, basically, they're all gone, right? Now, every agency at every level, whether it's the federal, state, local level, they're on the walls. They all share the same data within each other. So, and that leads to other problems as well, and I won't get into that.
Were any of you
That involves the intelligence services.
at the I think it's April and May 2000 briefing that the FAA security people did with airline officials? I don't. Brief.
Staff was.
Were you there, Ed?
No, I wasn't, but my staff was.
And what did they report back to you? Have you seen the CD-ROM presentation?
Yes, yes.
Did you see to it prior to 9/11?
Probably. I'm very familiar with it, yes. Could I build,
Sure.
Senator Kerrey, on your question? The law that you talk about, quite frankly, when you read it as you do, it would presume that the burden is upon the carrier. But if I could share some history with you, how that law has been applied to us, is that when we have tried to deny boarding, most recently after 9/11, 38 of our captains denied boarding to people they thought were a threat. Those people filed complaints with the DOT, we were sued, and we were asked not to do it again. So the burden upon us was to only take those people off of the flight who we knew posed a threat. And the only way we can know that they pose a threat is through those who identify them. Quite frankly, at United, and I know at American, in the mid-90s, there were customers who assaulted our passengers. We created our own list of those people who committed violent acts on our airplanes to keep them off the airplane. We were reminded quite frequently that unless they posed an immediate threat, we were disobeying the common carrier rules.
But if you just take the first, in April of 2000, April 24, 2000, the Security Directive 95 comes up. I presume you're familiar with this. If not, I can show you the list as well. Have you seen this list?
Yes, I know. I'm familiar with it.
So they got 6 guys on here.
Right.
All of whom have some relationship with Ramzi Youssef.
Right.
Right? So
Right.
you get the list. What do you do about that?
There are a number of things we do with it. Some of them I think I would prefer to discuss in a private session because those are part of procedures today. But those lists were distributed not only to the field as a list, because 6 names is pretty easy to manage. I might, you probably know already, Senator, that list grew to over 1,800 within a week. Managing that becomes much more complex. Those names are fairly easy. Many people have common names, and what becomes very, very complex is if we have someone whose name, to use a generic name, is John Smith, and we have a list that says deny boarding to John Smith, and quite frankly, the Arab names are repeat very, very frequently, then we may have 500 or 600 people with that name on any given day. Now,
Yeah, that's a good point that Soliday raises, and it's something that I hear from the Truth Movement about living hijackers, right? So Arabic names have very similar names. For example, Abdulaziz Al-Amari. He's supposed to be a hijacker for American Airlines 11. A BBC article came out talking about a living hijacker, Abdulaziz Al-Amari. What they didn't report was the guy's name was Abdulaziz Rahman Al-Amari, right? He was also a pilot for Saudi Arabia Airlines, in which he actually called in to BBC and said, I'm still alive. But they didn't use his picture. So they just used the name. But the name is similar. The hijacker is just simply Abdulaziz Al-Amari. The living Saudi pilot is Abdulaziz Rahman Al-Amari. So the BBC actually got it wrong, and they misspelled, they forgot to put in the Rahman surname. And, the truthers, the fringe conspiracy theorists, not truthers, not all of them, but the fringe conspiracy theorists ran away with it and said, and they still use it today. And this is 20 years later, 21 years later. And they say, oh, there's still living hijackers. And they go back to that dumb article.
we have to be able to, in a very short time frame, identify which one is the one on the list. And so as the list grows, the handling of that, you can do some of it with computer services, but much of it has to be done with hand phone lines and so forth. Now, there are contingencies in place at the present time that have helped that
But
significantly.
why didn't we modify the, what do you call the on-flight security procedures, the common strategy? Why didn't we modify that common strategy to accommodate the possibility that suicide could be something that the pilot would, that a hijacker would select?
First of all, Senator Kerrey, the common strategy, I'm glad you said.
That wasn't the case in the aviation report I just showed you. They do talk about martyrdom, suicide, hijacker pilot being a threat. That's an interesting point that Kerry raises here.
Modified, because if you look at history, the common strategy saved a lot of lives. To react in a violent way in the past to many of the hijackers would have cost many, many lives. And so the common strategy as with regard to how it interfaced with government agencies did change over time. What we asked the folks on board to do, again, I would say to you that while the emphasis, in fact, at a noted government hearing after the Gore Commission, the RAND Corporation produced a witness that said these people are not suicidal. He happened to be an Israeli consultant. So when we looked at the possibility of hijacking, we at United practiced hijacking 4 times after 1999. Various forms of hijacking, to include an anthrax on the airplane. We practiced with the FBI, with other government agencies, to ascertain how we could react. But the idea that they would be able to train people to fly complex airliners and navigate them was something that none of us contemplated.
Why?
I would assume that the type of training we give to pilots is very, very sophisticated. These were all glass cockpit airplanes.
No, but I mean,
Okay, interesting that he raises that because it is understood that the FAA did the same thing. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to read it. I'm going to share an article here. So we're going to read it together. All right. FAA downplayed hijack threat, and this is January 26, 2004. Months before the September 11th attacks, the Federal Aviation Administration played down the possibility of suicide hijackings, saying the greater threat was from explosives smuggled aboard planes, according to a federal panel investigating the attacks. In July 2001, the FAA issued a warning to air carriers, but did not mention suicide hijackings. Instead, it focused on the possibility that some terrorist groups might conceal explosive devices inside luggage. Obviously, the FAA basically ignored the Civil Aviation Reference Handbook of May 1999, where they actually talked about the terrorist threat against U.S. civil aviation and why terrorism is the greater threat. And they taught, and I showed you where they talk about the threat of hijacker pilots crashing them into buildings or sensitive targets. Bush administration officials have maintained that before the attacks, there was no indication terrorists were considered suicide hijackings. But the report said the FAA's Office of Civil Aviation Security officially considered the possibility of suicide hijacking as early as March 1998. This is May 99. So repeated reports, repeated warnings, not just to the FAA, but to the intelligence services, also to the State Department under Clinton, to the FBI, to Immigration Naturalization Services, to the aviation industry, and everyone ignored the warnings. Goodness gracious. There's your conspiracy. There it is. Okay? Not that they didn't have enough warnings, they had an enormous amount.
the why comes
Concentrate on that.
from you were training for the possibility of hijacking.
Yes.
And by the way, the procedures in this particular case seem to be seriously flawed at the passenger screening level. We heard earlier, this commission has heard that if I'm carrying a blade that's smaller than 4 inches, that and I've been screened and they find it, they give it back to me pre-9/11. I mean, it seems to me even there's vulnerabilities that were rather substantial to be able to take a plane over. But given all the, again, even in this presentation that was done in 2000, but all the threat assessments that were being done in 98, 99, 2000, 2001, they had to include some discussion of suicide. I mean, as I mentioned, the word I used earlier was suicide has become a technology. Suicide attacks have become a technology that increasingly is being used by, again, largely people that are motivated by religion against us.
I think, first of all, that is a fact that today.
Well, they weren't motivated by religion. They were motivated by our foreign policy.
We are very, very aware, after what's been happening in Israel, that suicide is something that they will do. But the thought that they would be able to have the technical skill to fly an airplane, that level of education, Senator Kerrey, in honesty with you, you are a trained spec ops person.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, you're making a common mistake that the fringe conspiracies theorists of the truth movement make the mistake that the Arabs don't have the capabilities to actually go to a flight school, train on even just a simulator, and learn how to fly a Boeing plane, right? I find this to be quite shocking, right? I think this is just an excuse from Soliday because the evidence is there, and I'm showing it to you, that there was repeated warnings that there was going to be a threat from fundamentalists to hijack planes. I mean, these guys don't want to take the brunt of the bear. I understand that. But my God, you can't ignore the evidence that is completely overwhelming. These people, even before Al-Qaeda, okay, we had a number of hijackings abroad committed by Hezbollah, okay, Nabi Berri, I mean, Imad Mughniya. These are names that you should familiarize with regarding hijackings that were happening in the Middle East. A number of hijackings. They're capable of flying these planes, more than capable. They could go to flight schools. They could learn to fly on Boeing simulators. They could learn to fly on, 707s and smaller planes, to just have a general understanding, a layman's understanding of how to navigate a plane. Okay, it doesn't take an expert to crash.
You know as well
They weren't trying to become professionals.
as I, sir, that these people could have gotten on that airplane stark naked and done what they did.
Yes, they could have.
So all of this discussion, you and I both know that if we were taking knives away, they would have planned the spec op around those knives not being there.
But this is where I will send some written questions to you, because I've got serious questions about the current strategy on the airlines today. A lot of it seems to me, is reactive. A lot of it seems to me to be politically motivated more than it is motivated by real security concerns.
Yeah.
And I'd very much like, I'll do it in writing to you, because I'd very much like to get feedback from you all, because I'd like very much for our part of our recommendations to be to say, quit being motivated by politics here. Let's figure out what the right solution is and do it, whether it's the FAA's responsibility or your responsibility. These 19 guys knocked us over just as easy as could be. They exploited every visible weakness. And you're exactly right. Once they were on that plane, their chances of failure were practically zero. And I think you've got to help us, especially, I think, on the intel side. Though I think it's unarguable, if you look at the presentation that was done in May of 2000 by the FAA can't just say as they've done. They've given us 5 or 6 pages of rebuttal to the Joint Committee saying, we didn't know, we didn't know, we didn't know, we didn't know, we didn't know. It's like, I mean, how many times can you say we didn't know before somebody says, Jesus, you should have.
Right.
It was your responsibility.
Exactly.
You should have asked if you don't know. I didn't want to make the FBI mad. I didn't want to make the CIA mad. I mean, given all the things that were going on, again, the background of 98, 99, and 2000 and 2001, I mean, I think you all can help us a lot, not just to understand what happened that day, which I'm sure makes you feel worse than it makes me in many ways, because they were your employees, you're associated with it in a very active and upfront way. You've got to help us by being very frank, not right now, because this commission's got a lot of other commissioners ask questions, but you've got to, in writing, tell us what aren't we doing that we should be doing, that where
Yeah, all right, I'll tell you what, you should have been doing your job. God, you had every ample opportunity to stop these guys from not just doing these attacks, but from entering the country. Let's even go to screening process, right? Immigration screening. J. Michael Springman, for example, was working, I think, in the Jeddah U.S. consular office, where he basically, throughout the mid-90s, early late 90s, where he basically suspended the applications of people who couldn't even answer the question because they lacked information, or they lacked even the ability to speak English. A lot of these guys. So, for example, let's say some of the hijackers of 9/11, I think there was like 11 applications that were suspended. And J. Michael Springman basically suspended a couple of them. And because they were incomplete, right? These guys basically didn't know where they were going, didn't know who they were meeting, had very minimal funds, basically couldn't tell them how long they were staying there for. All these are warning signs, okay? So they were held in suspension, and he did his job. What happened? Well, he got overruled by a consular office higher than him who had connections to the CIA. Her name was Shania Steiger. I'm not going to get into that because it makes for a long discussion. Maybe I'll do a video about that. I think I should, regarding why she allowed these applications to go forward. And a lot of those, some of those people were involved with the 9/11 hijackings. So it's not like these people, some people actually did their job, but it didn't matter because their superiors basically didn't do theirs. Okay. That went down to even to the federal level in the Department of Justice, for example, the FBI. The FBI basically were warning their superiors about hijackings. Ken Williams was one. Mark Lucini out of the CIA's Alex Station was another, where he wanted to warn his superiors about 2 hijackers that were inside the United States, and the CIA basically told him not to because it was CIA information, not FBI information. Robert Wright Jr., through vulgar betrayal, an FBI operation that detailed that there were Al-Qaeda and Hamas operatives inside the United States using charities to fund operations, and individuals who had terrorist ties to not just Osama bin Laden, but also to Saudi sympathizers who had terrorist leanings in Saudi Arabia and the Gulf. So yeah, some of these guys basically did their jobs, but it's their superiors who didn't do theirs. And even though you interviewed them at the 9/11 Commission, you didn't reprimand them because that wasn't what the 9/11 Commission or the Joint House Inquiry was there for. According to the 9/11 Commission, you basically wanted to purport a story, and that was it. You basically ignored a ton of information. Not that you got some things wrong, which you did. You got some things right, which you did. Bob Kerrey is an example, and just as one breakdown video I'm doing, where he basically did mention a couple of things that were actually right. Some questions that were actually reasonable. So not everything in the report is wrong. So you people in the truth movement who basically say that everything in the 9/11 Commission report is false, well, you're wrong because you never read it. Not everything is wrong. A lot more is missing. So it should be called the 9/11 Missing Report. That's what it should be called.
It's a national identification card. Do you think that's what it ought to be? Tell us. I don't have to worry about the National Rifle Association. I don't have to worry about civil libertarians. I only have to worry about what you tell me that should be done. And by the way, I'm a customer. And when the commission finishes its work today, I'm taking the train back to New York. In no small measure because I find the security procedures not only to be a nuisance, but I think they're largely ineffective.
Right.
I mean, you're exactly right. Buck naked, I sit on that plane and say, well, I hope, I hope they've got this thing figured out because Well, first of all, they've never let me on. That would really be obnoxious. Let me on like naked. But yeah, you're not anxious to see it.
And when Bush federalized the security apparatus of the airlines industries and implementing the Transportation Security Administration, the TSA, they found out that that agency basically is no better than the security agencies that were there before it, preceding it, like Oregon Bright or Huntley. It basically didn't do anything any better, but that was, that was a federal push, right, to implement their security apparatus. It wasn't better.
I mean, I hope that you'll help us by being as honest as you possibly can and as frank and as detailed as you possibly can about what we aren't doing that we ought to be doing to prevent this in the future.
Senator Kerrey, I would look forward to that. I think I agree with the things you have said and have participated at the National Academy and other places. I think it's very, very important that we focus on the future, but we also recognize that these people were highly skilled military professionals, and the only way we stay ahead of them is to have an iterative process that grows continuously, and that we understand there is no one pill nor no amount of blame that will solve the problem. We need to have a system that continuously improves itself.
And one of the last things I'd say is I hope that I'm asking you, don't call this terrorism. It is terrorism, but it's coming from a relatively small group of Muslims who religiously believe in killing infidels. That's the pathway to heaven. And everybody in this room is an infidel. And it's enormously important that we begin with that. Otherwise, we, in the first instance, are unable to identify what the risk is. But in the second instance, there's a tendency to have the wrong policies and procedures that make it difficult for us to be very discriminating to identify people who are genuinely a risk to us.
Right. Okay, that's the end. Just to add, all right, these small group of Arabs that believe in this ideology called Wahhabism, which is from the founder Muhammad ibn Abdul al-Wahhab, who basically is a nomad that wanted to bring Islam back to the first and second generations, which are called the caravan, right? The first generation, I think it's the first, second generations of the Prophet Muhammad, and that they wanted to bring back the old laws of Islam and get rid of like the praying at the tomb of Muhammad and stop having foreigners come into the land of Mecca, Medina and pray at these tombs and stop praying at tombs of the prophets, and consider Shias as munafiq or fake Muslim apostates. And this is basically coming from the ideology that predated it. Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab ideology came from Ibn Taymiyyah, a Hadith scholar, who basically is considered a heretic in Islam, even to some Sunni scholars. And this is something the truth movement basically is completely absent regarding. We don't care what the hijackers believed. Well, that's because you don't believe in hijackers. That's the problem. So when you don't believe in hijackers, you don't care to understand the motivations and beliefs of these people. But that wasn't what drove them, right? That wasn't what drove Muhammad Atta. He basically said, just like what Ramzi Youssef said in 1993 in the sentencing hearing, we attacked the United States because of your disposition toward the Arab world regarding Israel and the biased foreign policy with them. And, the truth movement likes to talk about Jews, but you can't mention them because you don't believe in hijackers. And that's exactly what this is about. If you don't believe in hijackers, you don't believe that Israeli intelligence were monitoring them, because there's no hijackers, there's no Israeli intelligence monitoring them. End of story. So that's why I think the truth movement is basically in trouble in 20 years after the attacks, because they don't have a basic understanding of the geopolitics of 9/11. Need I remind you, just take a look at Richard Gage's channel, look who he's interviewing. The luminaries of the fringe conspiracists. Getting back to here, there is nothing you could basically do to implement a stricter security measure because it's too late, right? So now we got to prevent what's happening. But guess what? It's not like they're going to try and hijack planes again in any time future, because that's exactly what we're looking for. So they're going to try any type of unorthodox means in which we're not looking for. So that means that they'll be looking for weaker security apparatuses within the public and private industry. So wherever that may be, I don't know, whether it be the bridges, the tunnels, who knows? But would it matter? Because guess what? Even before 9/11 even happened, it could have been stopped. Why? And that's not me saying it. That's coming from former national security executive of the NSA, Thomas Drake. That's coming from the FBI, whistleblowers like Mark Rossini and Ken Williams and Robert Wright Jr., Harry Samet in Minneapolis. You know, these guys basically tried to warn the United States about people who were trying to enter flight instruction training programs and to hijack planes. Their superiors ignored them. Whether it was intentional or not, I don't know. That's the only thing I don't know. So there you have it, okay? We had the warnings. We ignored those warnings. Whether it was intentional or not, I don't know. But it's not like we didn't know what was going to happen. And in the years prior, those warnings persisted at least 5 to 6 years, at least that much. But that's it for this one. We'll see you in the next breakdown video.